The secret disappearance of my wife! My name is James Harris. I was 52 years old when the events described herein occurred. I was married to the woman I loved, had 2 grown children whom we raised properly, and a well-paying job that I enjoyed. I had the world by the tail, and life was wonderful until it wasn't anymore. It all started on a Tuesday night. I worked a little late that evening, but not so late that my wife was concerned, and headed home after the rush hour traffic subsided. It was my usual Tuesday evening. We had agreed that I would stop at a Chinese store on the way home, which I did. I parked in the garage, pressed the remote button to lower the door, grabbed my briefcase and groceries, and headed inside. I was a mighty hunter returning to the cave to feed my hungry companion, or what in 21st century America counts as such. Almost immediately, I noticed my wife's car wasn't in its usual spot, but figured she must have gone on a last-minute errand and assumed she'd be back soon. So I left the food set on the kitchen table, hoping to keep it warm and knowing that if it lingered, we'd heat it up in the microwave. I walked down the hallway to the front door, turned down by the stairs, and headed to our bedroom to change into something more comfortable. It was my usual routine of coming home, getting comfortable, and eating. 10 minutes later, I was coming down the stairs and called out to Marie. "Marie, are you home?" Nothing. I thought, where could she have gone? Maybe she left a note. It didn't really alarm me, but by this point, I was at least curious. I looked into the living room and found it on the coffee table. It wasn't the note I expected to see, but one I couldn't have imagined. It read, "Dear Jim, I'm sorry to do this to you, but someone needs me. I got a phone call today. It's one of those calls that you have to answer when it comes in. I'm sorry for running away unannounced, and I know this will be hard on you, but please know that I love you more than life and will come home as soon as I can. I cherish the life we created together, and I hope to return to it when I can. Don't worry about me, I will be fine. Your loving wife, Marie." Her cell phone was on the coffee table next to the letter. I was stunned and confused. I went over in my mind what I had read in her cryptic letter. Did she say someone needs her? Who needs her? Who could be so important and yet not tell me who they are? Then panic set in. Where did she go? How could it be so urgent that she couldn't tell me where she would be? How could she have left her cell phone behind? When could she have contacted me? This was not the kind of note a wife leaves her husband when planning to return late at night. Panic was replaced by fear, and fear by anger. How could she do this? She just picks up and runs away without explaining fully why or where she's going to be. Then even darker thoughts crept into his head. How could she leave her phone behind? Gave way to the question, why did she leave her phone behind? I reread her letter again, and the second time it told me no more than the first. There is someone who needs me. I got a call today. It's one of those calls you have to answer when it comes in. Who the hell does she think she is? She's not a secret agent. She's not a super spy. She's not a brain surgeon for the leaders of the free world. Where, my wife? I'll admit, in that moment, my anger was a mask for my fears. I was worried about my wife. Wherever she was, I was sure she would need my help. I wanted to go to her, but where had she gone? I wanted to hear her voice and know she was okay, but I had no way to contact her. I just sat and reread her note as dinner got cold and the sun went down. It was long after dark when I finally decided to start calling. I called her sister, our friends, and finally called our kids. No one knew anything or told me anything. Worst of all, I only succeeded in scaring our children. I tried to convince them that nothing scary had happened, but I wasn't very good at it. So I left them with the promise that I would keep them informed. Now I was even more angry and blamed her for scaring our children, even though I had been complicit in the mistake myself. I reread the letter again. I cherish the life we created together and hope to return to it when I can. These were not the words of someone who would be coming home in a few hours or even days. Now I was truly scared, and even though I told myself I was overreacting, I called the hospital. She wasn't there. Then I called the police, but they said I couldn't file a missing persons report for 48 hours unless I was reporting a missing child. I wondered if I should lie. But how could I say I wanted to report a 5'8", brown-haired girl who could be given 38, even though she was 49 missing? I thanked them and hung up. I finally tried to eat something, but I didn't feel like eating, so I just put the food I'd bought in the fridge and sat in the darkened living room, hoping she'd come back. She didn't come back. I climbed the stairs a little after 2 in the morning and fell soundly asleep. When I awoke the next morning, I stretched and found her bed cold and empty. Everything came over me again, and I lay there wondering what I should do. I called work and told them I would be out. My leaving work was such an unusual occurrence that it seemed to cause concern, and before I knew it, my phone was ringing with coworkers wanting to know if I was okay, what I needed. Could they do anything? And what had I done with those files? Truth be told, trying to help them diffused the situation a bit, and I was briefly distracted from my worries. I called her office, but all they told me was that she called in and took some time off. I don't think they were hiding anything from me, although I thought about it for a while, but as time went on, I became more and more convinced that they were as much in the dark as I was. I stopped by her office several times, hoping that the face-to-face conversations would prove frank, but they knew nothing more than what I already knew, which was practically nothing. She left sometime on Tuesday, but I didn't discover she was missing until Tuesday night, and the police require 48 hours, so I went to the police station on Friday morning to file a missing persons report. I showed them her note, and they asked if she had done anything like this before. Yelling at police officers is not a good idea, but by that point, I was not in the best of spirits. They threatened to charge me if I didn't calm down, so I forced myself to sit down until they thought I was a testy suspect and filled out a form. That's when they said, "Usually in these cases, the wife runs off with her boyfriend. You will find out if you are served with divorce papers in the next few days." Never in my life have I wanted to punch a policeman so badly. Instead, I just muttered, "Thanks for doing nothing," and walked away. So much for the service at Protect and Serve. I got home and collapsed into a chair. The stress was tearing me apart. There was nothing to do but resume calling friends and family, but this time I had the good sense not to call my kids. Instead, they called me, and I had to tell them, "I still don't know anything, but I'm sure Mom is fine. She's smart, capable, and I'm sure she has everything under control." In other words, I was lying to my own children. A father should never lie to his children. But I had nothing good or bad to say to them except that their mother was still missing. How do you have that kind of conversation with children who have every reason to be concerned about their mother? My calls to friends and family on Tuesday night triggered an avalanche of calls to me on Wednesday. They started out calmly with comments like, "Just checking in," and gradually became more concerned by Thursday. Everyone wanted to know what I was doing to find Marie, and by Friday, the tone of some of them took on an unmistakable coloration. No one was talking about it yet, but the concern was turning to accusation. If the calls on Friday were bad, the visits on Saturday became simply impossible. Friends and family would stop by to see how I was doing. They always started with words of encouragement, but questions soon followed. Were there any problems between you two? Were you two fighting? Was she unhappy? The killer question came from her mother. "Are you sure you don't know where she is?" I snapped and yelled at my mother-in-law for the first time since we'd known each other. "What kind of nonsense are you talking, Margaret? Are you accusing me of something? Do you really think I would lie about something like that?" No, Jim. Of course you wouldn't. It's just that..." She blanched. "Spit it out, Margaret. Just what?" She looked me in the eye, and with an angry look that I will remember until the day I die, replied, "It's just that she's never done anything like this before." I pushed my anger and hurt deeper where I hoped they wouldn't show, and in the calmest voice I was capable of, I said, "You think I don't know that? By then, she was visibly trembling. Her husband said, "Jim, we know you're doing your best. Could you tell us what you know, and maybe we can work something out?" I nodded my head. We sat in silence, and then I told them everything I knew, or rather how I knew nothing. I showed them the letter, and they were puzzled and concerned in equal measure. The unspoken accusations fell away, and we spent an hour in floods of tears, trying to come up with something, anything at all, that could explain Marie's sudden disappearance. We had nothing. Henry and Margaret stayed until lunchtime while I prepared a light lunch for the three of us, or so I thought. Our friends seemed to have other ideas, and there was a constant crowd at the front door, some carrying food, others carrying beer, and all wanting to know what had happened and what I knew. At some point, I stopped telling the story. That's when Margaret and Henry stepped in. To her credit, there was no fault on my part, and she gave me top marks for being a concerned husband. I know everyone had their suspicions in the back of their minds, but at least it felt like I was supported again. I was simply overwhelmed as one well-wisher after another planted themselves on me to express their support and concern. I encouraged everyone to contact the police if they thought of anything that might help, but I secretly thought that someone knew something they weren't telling me and hoped that word would reach the authorities, even if I never found out about it. As far as I could tell, no one knew anything, and other than a few supporters calling the police to ask if they had any leads, nothing happened for weeks. That is, nothing happened for exactly 2 weeks. The police had the license for my wife's car, as well as the make and model, and they put it on their list of possible stolen cars. When I made a remark to anyone like, "I hope they find her car, then maybe they can find her," they looked at each other like I didn't understand. And I did. And I knew what they were thinking. She had run away, and there was a good chance she didn't want to come home even if they found her. I tried to go to work, but I was useless there, and everyone was telling me to go home. I went home, but I was just as useless there too. First, I sat around making phone calls. Then I drove around looking for her car. I even drove past friends' houses, thinking maybe they were hiding her, though I couldn't imagine why. Day after day, I worried, called, drove, bothered the police, but got nowhere. In a fit of desperation, I went to my lawyer to ask what I should do, and he put me in touch with a private investigator. Officially, the police said it was my right. Unofficially, I could tell they didn't like it. They told me that private investigators usually interfere with official investigations, so I asked them, "What do you have so far?" They had nothing, and I told them in language that could politely be called frank that I didn't think a private investigator would interfere with them finding anything. They didn't like it, but they couldn't object to it either. The private detective was expensive, and he turned out to have exactly what the police already had: nothing. As I said, it was 2 weeks after Marie's disappearance. I was still doing the same things, calling, driving, and watching the news, but I also started checking Marie's social media, her credit cards, and our bank accounts. There was nothing on the cards, but 2 weeks later I made a withdrawal from an ATM in a town 200 miles away. I immediately called the police and let them know about it. That got their attention, and within half an hour, I had 2 detectives at my door and suspicion began again. Finally, I looked them in the eye and in the calmest voice I was capable of, but which, in retrospect, was one small step short of fury, said, "No, I didn't go there or use that car. I was here in the city the whole time. I called friends, drove around looking for her car, and did. Much more than any of you. Now you have a lead. Get off your fat asses and follow it." They clearly didn't like me, and just as clearly didn't care. But after half an hour of assurances and implied accusations, they left. To their credit, they did contact the police in that town and sent them out to find Marie and her car. 2 days later, they found her car in the hospital parking lot. The local police called me and said, "Don't do anything. Let us take care of it." I said, "No," and drove off. A little over 3 hours later, I pulled into the hospital parking lot. It took about 2 minutes to find her car, but it felt like 2 hours to me. I also noticed 2 suits in a car labeled cops, so I parked and walked over to them. It looked like they were waiting for me. I showed them my driver's license and said, "Show me your badges." They looked at each other and were not happy, but did as I asked. I knelt down and asked what they knew, and all they knew was that they had the car, and no one had approached it since they arrived. When I said I was going to look for my wife, they informed me that they had already found it. I thanked them with all the fake sincerity I was capable of and informed them that I was going to do it anyway. I was winding up fast and making friends. The hospital receptionist didn't know my wife's name and knew nothing about the car parked outside, so I decided to join the stakeout. I had nothing to hide and everything to gain, so I asked to sit in the back seat of their car. It was probably the first time I had surprised a cop since this whole thing started, but they agreed, and I joined them. We spent the next hour talking, and I told them the little I knew. When their shift was over and it was time for them to leave, they agreed to let me watch the car. But they made it clear. If anyone comes to get the car, whether it's coming out of the hospital or someone driving up to it in a car, don't interfere. Just call us and tell us the car is moving. Do not try to chase her. Don't do anything but call us. Do you understand? I nodded. Remember, there's a small chance they have your wife and will lead us to her, but it's more likely they just bought the car from someone and don't know anything. However, they can help us trace who sold them the car. It's very important that you do nothing. Understood? For the first time since this whole thing started, I actually understood and agreed. I walked back to my car and spent the next 3 hours sitting hunched over in my seat watching Marie's car. The only time I left my post was for the fastest urination in history, when I walked in and out of the hospital so fast I was still buttoning my fly as I crossed the lobby. An hour later, I saw a woman walking toward the car and my heart stopped. I fought for breath. It was Marie. She opened the car door and pulled out something small, then closed the car and started walking back to the hospital. I followed her. I kept my distance. Something told me that if she became aware of my presence, I would never get to the truth. When we entered the hospital, I walked about 20 meters behind her. I watched her get into the elevator and watched the elevator stop on the 3rd floor. It wasn't long before I looked into the room and saw her sitting by the man's bed. He appeared to be asleep or unconscious, and she was holding his hand. I cleared my throat, and when she turned around and saw me in the doorway, my beloved and loving wife fainted. I was angry and confused, but called for the nurse who looked after her until she came to her senses. All the while, I studied the man on the bed. I had never seen him before. He was not a friend or relative. He was just a man, but it was clear that to Marie he was more important than her marriage, more important than her family, and seemingly more important than me. One mystery solved, and immediately a new one appeared. While the nurse picked Marie up off the floor, I took the opportunity to call the local detectives and let them know that my wife had been found. They told us to stay put, and they would be right over, and I gave them the room number. Life was starting to get very interesting, and as I looked at the man in the bed, I felt a cold chill grab my heart, where fear used to be. When Marie came to her senses, she was on the verge of hysteria and only shook her head when I calmly and coldly asked her questions. "Why, Marie? Who is that man? Why did you run away like that? Why didn't you tell us where you were? Why didn't you tell us you were okay? Marie, what's going on, for heaven's sake?" A few times, she looked like she was going to answer, but then she put her head down and started sobbing all over again. I stood there, waiting, asking and wondering, when the detectives arrived. I let them take over and stepped aside, but they immediately asked me to leave the room. One of them joined me and asked a dozen questions. I simply told him the truth, that I had seen Marie walk to the car, followed her, and then confronted her in the room. Perhaps bumped into is an unfortunate choice of words, and for the next 5 minutes I assured him that I hadn't hurt her in any way. When he learned that the nurse had found her lying on the floor, the questions resumed with greater seriousness. All this time, his partner had been talking to Marie. In time, I think I convinced them that I hadn't hurt my wife, or maybe she convinced them. I don't know. They wanted me to leave, so I called into the room. "Marie, if I leave here, I will divorce you. Do you understand me?" That got hysterical again, and she begged me not to leave. Then I looked the detective in the eye and said, "I'm not going anywhere until I get answers." Eventually, they let me back into the room. As quietly and calmly as possible, I began to ask Marie the questions that were burning in my brain. Marie only gave cryptic half-answers to my questions. He was her high school boyfriend. He was her first love. He was dying, and he had no one. There were long pages of information written between these lines, but I was left to ask or guess. "How did you live here for 2 weeks without using a bank card?" She was silent for a long time before she finally offered, "I've been staying at his place." "So you know where he lives?" "Of course." "And do you have a key?" She only nodded. "How long have you had a key to his house?" She just shrugged and looked at the floor. I knew that if I made the accusation, I was in for one hell of a payback if I was wrong. Still, 2 weeks is more than a man should have to wait in the dark for answers. "How long, Marie?" She didn't answer. "How long has the affair lasted?" She did not answer the question, nor did she refute the accusation. At such moments, the mind freezes. There would be time for more questions and new pain later. "Okay, I think you've at least given me a chance to look at his house. I want you to take me back to where you're staying." She looked at me in horror as panic overwhelmed her. Eventually, she gave up and just nodded. She gathered her coat and we headed to my car. "I'll drive," I said, "and then I'll bring you back." She seemed surprised by this, but agreed. I guess by then the detectives had decided it was a private matter. After warning her one last time not to do anything stupid, they drove off. Marie was silent most of the way, except when she needed to give me directions. At one point, she barely audibly whispered, "They said we might be required to reimburse the police for the time we spent on them." I wanted to ask, "Who is this we you speak of?" but kept silent. God only knows what my pulse and blood pressure were like. I could barely stay on my feet. As we pulled into the short driveway in front of the townhouse, I realized I would likely find the answers to my questions inside. Marie led us into the house, and as we walked through the living room, I immediately noticed a pair of my wife's shoes on the floor by the couch. On a chair lay a scarf that she loved. I wandered down the hallway when Marie called out to me, "James, please don't go in there." If ever my wife's words had the opposite effect, these were the words. I walked into the bedroom. Marie's clothes were scattered on the untidy bed and chair, and her makeup and other things were on the dresser. It was only when I opened the dressing room and saw the familiar dresses there that my last doubts left me. Her favorite blue dress was there, but I knew for a fact that it had been hanging in her closet at home. It was a duplicate, and there were several pairs of shoes, seemingly in her size and the styles she liked. These weren't things she'd packed for the trip. These were things she had stored here. I had no doubts now, and I knew that if I opened a few drawers, I'd find her underwear and stuff. The room seemed set up not so much for living as for occasional late-night visits, dinner and dancing, and then intimacy and sleep in the arms of a lover. I returned to the living room feeling like a broken man, where I found Marie sitting quietly on the edge of a chair, staring aimlessly at the floor. "So, is there anything you want to tell me?" She only shook her head slowly. "For how long, Marie? It's obviously not a platonic relationship. How long?" She just shrugged as if she didn't know the answer, but obviously she knew and didn't want to say. "Who is he to you?" She was silent for a long time and then answered in a weak voice. He was my first. We were together when we were in high school. I wondered if she meant high school or college, but both were long enough ago that I decided it didn't matter. How long have you been seeing him behind my back? She jerked her head sharply, but she didn't deny it. She wanted to deny it. She wanted it to be untrue, but we both knew it wasn't. We met again about 7 years ago. At first it was just lunch, then dinner. One night we went dancing while you were out of town. It was a year before we... She hesitated. Before you had sex? She nodded her head slowly. So you had sex with him behind my back for 6 years? How do you do that? Do you come here? Does he come to our house? This elicited an immediate reaction from Marie. She threw her head up. I never brought him to our house. I swear I wouldn't do that to you. I nodded, feeling angry. So you'll have sex with him, but you won't entertain him at our house. I'm glad to hear you draw the line somewhere. She was angry, but she couldn't deny it. After a long silence, she said, I never stopped loving you. He never took anything from you. I swear it. It was only a few nights a year and you have me forever. It was a lie taken from a cheater's textbook, and I thought, what's the point of arguing? But there was a point. He took away at least some of the love you said you had for me. You saved a part of your heart for him. Because of him, you lied to me repeatedly. You made vows to me, but you gave him a part of yourself that you said was only meant for me. Don't tell me he never took anything from me. He took everything, even if you don't think so. Marie was crying and I stood silently by her side. I knew everything I needed to know. I thought about trashing his house, smashing everything that could be smashed, but he wouldn't come home. In the end, I just gave up. Come on, Marie. I'll take you to your lover's bedside. This brought another bout of tears, but my heart was broken, and I had nothing to comfort her with. I drove her back to the hospital, and as she got out of the car, she begged me. James, please give me some time. He doesn't have anyone. I can't let him die alone. I'll be home soon. The last sentence elicited a short sob. I'll be home soon, and we can go back to our life together. Please, I love you, I swear. I just nodded and brushed her off, telling her he'd be waiting. I guess by then she knew it was over between us. I drove home slowly for 4 hours and didn't remember any of it. I was empty. 2 weeks of stress and worry, all those friends and family telling me not to give up hope, and now I find out that she had been with her lover the whole time. I was exhausted both physically and emotionally. I only stumbled into the house and sank into my favorite chair. I don't know how much time passed before the first phone call rang. It was her parents, and they wanted to know where I had been and if I had learned anything. That's when I realized I had run 200 miles away without saying a word. I briefly considered sparing Marie the embarrassment, but I guess I had spent the last vestiges of my manly love for the woman who had betrayed me over the years. So I told Henry and Margaret everything. They didn't want to believe it until I described what I had found in his house. At that point, it no longer mattered whether they believed me or not. My marriage was over. I knew it without thinking about it. It was a fact that burst from the depths of my soul, crushed my heart, and consumed me. It was over between Marie and me. She was in love with another man, and I wasn't the sharing type. Worse, she had spent years deceiving me, sneaking around behind my back and giving herself to him. It wasn't a mistake. It was a life of betrayal, and we weren't going to go back after that. I called my friends to break the news to them, and I spared nothing. I held back my anger as best I could, but I didn't lie for her. After practicing on them, I called our children and tried to gently but honestly tell them that I had found their mother and that she was with her lover who was dying in a hospital bed. They didn't want to believe it, so I told them about the townhouse. When they asked if I could forgive her, I said, maybe someday, but I will never trust her again. I apologized to both of them, but told them I was divorcing their mother. Then I forgot that they still had no way of contacting her and asked them not to tell her that. I said she needed any time left to spend with him and her rushing home wouldn't change anything. They argued with me, but eventually understood. 2 weeks later, he died and Marie came home, but I was gone. A week after she returned, she was served with divorce papers. I didn't leave town, quit my job, or hide from her. I just moved apartments until I eventually found a place that suited me. I was close enough to the old house that the kids could visit us both. Marie tried to change my mind. She would show up at my office or my apartment and beg me to change my mind. But I had already made up my mind. She cried and threatened, but it didn't change anything. That was 6 years of betrayal, and if you count lunches, dinners, and dances, it was 7. In the end, it was the lies, at least as much as the sex, that ruined our marriage. When I discovered how well and easily she lied to me, lied right to my face with a smile, I realized that she didn't view me with the same devotion that I viewed her with. It's been 2 years since the divorce was finalized. I don't ask, but the kids tell me that their mother just goes to work and then home. She doesn't go anywhere, or so they think. It saddens me that she is suffering so much, but there is nothing I can do to help her. To this day, I can't tell if she is grieving the loss of her first love or the marriage she betrayed. I'm not doing so well myself. I'm not healed, but the pain is slowly lessening. I'm not dating either, but I've started noticing other women and suspect I'll eventually dip into the dating pool. I'm still a long way from trusting another woman outside of a professional environment. I'll never know why she betrayed me, what she needed that I couldn't give her, or how she justified her behavior. I suppose I could ask, but what would be the point? It was her decision, and somehow she accepted it in that moment. I never told anyone about it because I doubt they would believe me even now. But I never learned his name. There was the man on his deathbed in the townhouse where my wife played house games when they were together. That was enough for me. You can't get revenge on a dead man, and I realized I couldn't forgive the wife who had betrayed me. The end. Subscribe to my channel. Thank you.